to me, the question there is, it's about our government institutions answering to how have you let this corruption seep in and rot this out at its core. And in many ways, I think the heart of who needs to answer for that is our law enforcement institutions, our FBI and our DOJ. And I can't think of anybody who I'm more disgusted by right now in our government than Kash Patel and Pam Bondi for their gross misrepresentation of what this is and their blatant moving of goalposts on the way here. And what to me, in my opinion, looks like direct obfuscation of, now that we've seen these files, now that we've read these documents, go back and rewatch what Pam Bondi said, what Kash Patel said, what Dan Bongino said about how there's no evidence that he trafficked girls to anyone. There's no evidence that he worked with anyone in any big conspiracy. It's mind-blowing that someone see these files and we don't even have them all yet. And that's what you would come up with.
And to your last point, we don't have them all yet. My understanding is a little over 3 million, I think, documents. However, that's measured. They're not documents. They're digital images, whatever. But that there are 1 million or more than 1 million more. This is like one tranche in a series.
So it's a little unclear. We were told that they had over 6 million. And so now that we have 3 point something million, speculatively there's several more million to go. But we don't really know, as far as I'm aware, exactly what they have. And one thing that I think we're at a time where it's important to remind the American people, because a lot of people actually didn't follow this story for a long time. A lot of people didn't read the literature that's been written on the case in the past. And a lot of people don't realize that it came out in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, sworn FBI testimony, like the testimony of FBI agents. It came out that when they first raided Jeffrey Epstein's home, and they found all those binders with all of those CDs in them that we now have photos of like CSAM did not scan, CSAM did not scan. We've got all the binder photos with all the different little photos in it. They at first found those binders and all those CDs and all those drives, and they photographed them all and did not take them with them because it was not within the scope of their warrant. They left all of that material there with Jeffrey Epstein's staff at his place. And then they later asked them to send it to them, and it was sent to the FBI by Jeffrey Epstein's people. And they had no way to corroborate if any of it was untampered with, basically. They didn't even raid several of his properties. And some of the properties that they did raid, they basically had advance warning, namely the island. So it's important to remember that, A, we don't have all the documents that they actually do have yet. But B, the actual documents that they do have is built on such a pathetic original collection of evidence. Not because all the FBI agents were corrupt and didn't want to do it, but because something in the system, something in the nature of how this thing was protected, prevented any real acquisition of evidence where maybe they could have gotten, I'm sure they could have gotten a lot. But you're not going to get a whole lot when you raid the pedophile's mansion and say, hey, would you send me all your hard drives in a week? I would love to take a look at them, right? And so that when that came out in the Ghislaine Maxwell trials a couple of years ago, it was just sort of like a big slap in the face to the whole idea that we're ever going to get any real justice here. Kind of reminded me of MK Ultra, of what we have from the MK Ultra documents is mind-blowing and messed up and completely unbelievable. But people often forget that actually Dick Helms our understanding at this point is that Dick Helms burned and destroyed well over 90% of the actual files that once existed about it. So we're dealing with a slice of a picture at this point.
MK Ultra, approaching 60 years ago, this stuff is some of these files are 7 years old. And the people engaged in these colloquies are still around. And by the way, I know some of them. Which gets to the other point, which is how was Jeffrey Epstein at the center of everything, every global story? I mean, he was going back and forth on Libya, he was going back and forth in the global financial crisis. It's like there's really
he was deeply involved in the global financial crisis. He was actually selling CDOs.
Okay, so can you just? I mean, there's so much here, and I hope when I'm, we're in the same place. We can go through this in much greater detail. But can you just tell us what we know about that Jeffrey Epstein's involvement or intersection with the global financial crisis? What's that?
Well, the intersection with the global financial crisis specifically is a wild story that, to be truly told, you need to put the evidence on screen as well. But the short version is that he had a company called Liquid Funding Limited that was domiciled in the Bahamas, that was partially owned by Bear Stearns. And Bear Stearns, is where he had come up for a long time. And Liquid Funding Limited was selling CDOs, the same types of CDOs that eventually caused the global financial crisis. It was capitalized at, I believe, $100 million and allowed to sell 20 billion with a B of CDOs. And I actually just was looking at that statistic earlier today because this is the craziest story. And that little CDO factory that Jeffrey Epstein was running tied into Bear Stearns. And if you recall, Bear Stearns was one of the first to collapse, right? That shut down in the months directly preceding Bear Stearns starting to collapse. And Jeffrey Epstein redeemed all of those CDOs, all of those assets. The terms are, I don't know the technical terms for what he did, but basically he made a run on the bank on those exact assets that were the exact problem. And he was tied into the exact bank that was financially distressed. And then he wound that whole company, Liquid Funding Limited, up and disappeared. And later, JP Morgan, the bank that he later worked with after, Bear Stearns was his early banking career. And then he later was doing all of his money laundering and banking and referring of people at JP Morgan. They came in, swooped up Bear Stearns for pennies on the dollar. They also later spun Liquid Funding Limited back up. There's a whole... there's a very overt financial paper trail that Jeffrey Epstein was better acquainted with the problem than almost anyone in the world because he was deeply enmeshed in Bear Stearns and knew the leadership of Bear Stearns very well. And he understood CDOs and he was selling CDOs. And then he just so happens to wind his whole shop up and close it down and redeem it all right at the moment when things are about to go bust. So that's a wild rabbit hole and it's very interesting. But
I mean, what is? I mean, that suggests, well, it doesn't suggest, it's like direct evidence of, if I'm assuming we can verify what you're saying, that like the biggest events in the world are actually not quite as organic or accidental as we're led to believe, and that this is like puppet master stuff. I mean, it is. I don't know what to say. I don't want this to be true, but that's what it looks like.
Yeah. And the reason why I feel comfortable saying that is because I actually did produce an entire YouTube video on teleprompter with my sources directly in front of my face. They're on screen. It's on my YouTube right now.
Yes.
I think it's titled Jeffrey Epstein Knew, or He Knew. And I put it out middle to late last year and walked through, document by document. Not that we know for sure, not that he schemed it with his Illuminati buddies, but he was right at the heart of it, had all the knowledge of it. He was deeply connected to all the parties in it. And then the timing is just so coincidental. And yeah, it does start to make you wonder about how much of our global events are orchestrated versus not. But then, you think about the global pandemic and you think about we've got documents in the Epstein files that they're talking about getting a war in Ukraine started and how that's going to be good for business. And so these files have a lot of these world events sort of woven throughout them, either directly or indirectly. It's sometimes hard to say. But the reason I think why Jeffrey Epstein is at the center of so many of these things and at the center of so many circles and at the center of so many, important and powerful networks in our world is because Jeffrey Epstein was a professional money launderer. There's this facade as though we don't know how Jeffrey Epstein made his money. And then there's also a lot of people that will erroneously report that Jeffrey Epstein made his money in legitimate ways, but then, got into crime or whatever. It's like that is not true. Jeffrey Epstein went from legitimate-ish banking at Bear Stearns, where he was managing private wealth for clients. And then in the 80s, he went into his like missing years where he said that he was a bounty hunter for billionaires. But we have lots and lots of evidence that during that time, he was working with arms traffickers, Douglas Leese, Anand Khashoggi, and Robert Maxwell, and getting into money laundering for arms dealers because he was exceptionally good at complex financial transactions, using derivatives, using tax havens, using charitable structures of complex charitable organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative. And he got better and better throughout his career at basically committing complex financial frauds, like the Tower Financials fraud that he was a major part of. And so when you get to the end of that line and he is getting into the actual human trafficking side of it, the blackmailing side of it, money launderers are the node that all criminal networks have to flow through. Money laundering is the network, the node that because it's not just like money laundering for criminal stuff. It's also if a billionaire wants to shelter their taxes or wants to pay less in taxes. And you can read the reporting about how Jeffrey Epstein referred Bill Gates and Sergey Brin and Benjamin Netanyahu and Larry Summers to JP Morgan for banking services. He referred a bunch of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world to JP Morgan for banking services, right? Which is completely nonsensical if you take it at face value. But when you realize that that's like how when you're in high school and you need to like know the guy that knows the weed dealer in order to get into like, the back door. It's like you need that trust network in a criminal space because criminals have to operate on trust. And so that it's like, a guy that knows a guy to get you in the back door for the back door of the banking system is what that looks like to me. And who would know that better than Jeffrey Epstein? And so there's this false narrative that we don't know how he made his money. We don't know what the network, we don't know. And what that means is that those people have not read what we do know. And there's a lot we still don't know. But how Jeffrey Epstein made his money and why he was at the center of so much is not the great mystery that it once was anymore.
Most security systems operate like old-fashioned cable internet. They're installed in one place, they're tied to one address, and if you move or your job moves, you got to start over. But that's not how other people do it. Construction sites, ranches, large properties, they have a better way. They need cameras that are portable, not tied down to one location. Defend security cameras are the perfect solution for ordinary people to do this. With Defend, you own the camera. You're not renting it like a modem from a cable company, and you're not locked to a building or a Wi-Fi network. The job moves, well, then the camera moves with it. That's a better way to do things. No power lines or infrastructure of any kind is required. These run on cellular, like your phone. They're perfect for watching job site equipment overnight, livestock at your ranch, long driveways, outbuildings on your property. You mount it where you need it. You open the Defend app and you are set. You got clear footage, night vision, alerts straight to your phone. Defend never sells any data to anyone, not tech companies, not the government, not China. Plans start at about $5 a month. There's no contract. You can cancel at any time. Visit defendcellcam.com today. Defendcellcam.com. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.